All right, this is after Thursday, April 27th, and I've taken the data that you guys recorded from Tuesday and I've rearranged it a little bit so that we have a different column for every kind of variable for each data point. And so really specific gravity is the measurement that we're comparing. But we gathered that data in some cases using a 5 ml pipette and in other cases a 1 ml pipettement. So the raw data in some cases needed to be divided by 5 to get specific gravity. But once we have specific gravity, each value came from either a 5 ml pipette or a P1000, or from one student or another student, or from one day or another day, because on this day, and this isn't quite right, you guys didn't take any data on the 27th, and so these all have the wrong date on them, and I'm going to correct that right now by just copying and pasting a 25. So I did two replicates. I did a one first time through of all these same samples that you guys measured yesterday. Water should stay the same, but the other samples, 5 and 5 prime, had yeast in them added to them. They very well may have changed over a day. And these other four sat out open. All of these sat open to evaporation. So that would have tended to concentrate things, but the yeast, making alcohol out of sugar, would have tended to reduce the specific gravity. Anyway, by putting all the data into this form, it allows you then to use, and then actually let me interrupt that sentence to say then I gathered additional data over here today for the specific gravity, and I did duplicate measurements of samples drawn out of each gallon brew treatment. Okay, so I did all that as well, but I'm just dealing with comparing these samples that you guys did yesterday and that I repeated again today. And so you can select that data and go and do something here called a pivot table. And I'll just show you how that comes up. It comes up blank, but over here, all your different fields can be arranged in any way you want, on rows or columns, and then the values go into the table, whatever you want as values. And in this case, our values are specific gravity values. So I've already started work on this table, and here you can see it arranged with the columns having first the date, either the 25th or the 27th. Then beneath that, the type of pipette, 5 ml or P1000. Notice P1000 on the 25th, P1000 on the 27th. I'm the only one that took measurements on the 27th, and I took a one replicate and a second replicate measurement. On the 25th, Bill and Samantha each only took one replicate measurement, but Jason, Jen, and I forget whether Hollis did this or whether Doug did this, but there was no name, but two people took replicate measurements of each sample. And we had beakers labeled 1 to 5 and 5 prime, and then 1 was water. So the pivot table pulls up individual values, and I'll just show you when we come over here to the add to field, we can look at the sum, which is the value if there's only a single thing. Each bot had a count of only one specific gravity, and so the sum of that value is the value of that one point, of that one entry. And so what I've done here is to label these with the initial of the person that did it, and it only comes in once. So here I'm going to just do a little trick. Oops. Let's escape out of that. F2 goes into here. What I just want is JC, because I'll show you in a second. Oops. Okay. So this is JC's first value, JC's second value. I could be wrong. JC's first, 1064, JC's second, 10. And so this is the unknowns first. Oops. Controls. That's why I don't like the mouse. And so here, if I double click, I want to add unknown. It's funny, I don't like, this is a new computer. I can just type UNK-2. So those are the labels I want. I got them initially by a formula, but since this gets not mentioned here along with the 2, it didn't get mentioned here along with the 2, so that's just details. I'm going to squish these up so you can see this a little better. Okay, and then I've plotted these data here. Control U, Control B, just to emphasize these are the labels. These are the series, these should be our X values here. The label should be in column J. And so that's what I've got here. And I've graphed it, and you can see how JC's first and second. Yeah. So that little X and that star, let's make them both a star. So these are Joseph's duplicates. The red and the blue star and the line connecting them shows the first time he did it, they sometimes higher, sometimes lower, and the second time in his precision, which can only be determined by repeating the same sample because these samples are unknowns and they should be different, could be different. I'm the only one that really knows where these samples 1 to 5 came from. Now notice Samantha's a little higher than Joseph, and this is actually these circles here is from my measurements today on the 27th, and so I'm a little lower than Samantha, but higher than the other folks, than Joseph or than Bill. Bill only took one sample, and this unknown person got much lower values, but fairly good precision. But in his case, each time, no, very. Notice that our precision, how far apart the duplicate values are from each other, is very similar for all of these different. The three people that did two replicate measurements of each sample seem to have precision that gave duplicates similarly far apart. There's better ways to say that, but the problem I want to bring up here is that this graph is not including the two samples called 5' and H2O. And it's not because it's plotting these x values as numbers, the first, the second, and they're equally spaced the way integers are. And so there's a problem that we can fix here if this graph changes. Notice, I'll just illustrate this by putting a 7 here. Now notice how that stretches this line out from where things were at 3 up to 7 before they come back to where they were at 4. And so it's plotting that 7 as a value on the x-axis. Now, we want to include these two that don't have numbers, and since the numbers are only placeholders, let's just start replacing them by numbers that are written as text. 2, 3, 4. And notice at a certain point it gives up trying to plot them as numbers and instead plots the words that we've been writing. So I can escape here and leave a 4 here. But now notice it's picked up the 5', which it treats as a text type of character or whatever word, and water, which is clearly text, and it properly labels the axis here, and it increased the y-axis range in order to include water. Okay? So now, the only sample that we know the true value of is water, and the true value should be about 998, somewhere up in here, like what I have. Some people are higher, some people are lower, and I'm going to pause right there. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you. I think before I leave, I'm going to put, no, that's okay. I want to label this axis, vertical axis, title. These are the specific gravities. And down here, the important thing to point out now, I'm trying to get that, the important thing to point out, this is just sample, let's call it name, okay, sample name or type or whatever you want here. But the important thing is there's no relationship between the first and the second. There's nothing occurring over time, and that's not entirely accurate. But water is simply water, and sample 5 is simply one of these samples with yeast added to it. Actually, I'll go through here and tell you what these are. The first, number 1, was the bottle was the way I left it Thursday a week ago. It wasn't brought up to 5 gallons yet. It was at about 4.7 or whatever. And so I took some sample out and I measured the specific gravity of it. And notice here's my values for that first sample. It was high, and so I thought it should come down. It was about 1.8, and they wanted it to be about 1.65 or something. So I diluted it up to 5 gallons and didn't want to go too far because you don't want it to go too dilute because then you won't have much alcohol. It'll be very dry. With low alcohol. So I diluted it, and then I took another sample, and then I thought, well, I got to take a duplicate or something. I ended up taking 2 more samples of the same thing. Notice my values here are almost identical for all of these. But I knew, so potentially I was biased when I took these measurements today. None of these samples had yeast in them, so if they're going to change, they're going to change slowly over time. They may have had evaporation occurring between when you guys measured them and when I measured them today, and that would have tended to increase their specific gravity, made them more concentrated, less water. But in any case, then for 5, this 5 gallons of stuff was in the big bucket, in the big container, and I mixed up the yeast, the 1 packet, in 100 milliliters of water and added that yeast, and then poured some sample out. That was 5, and then I poured out a duplicate 5 to have 2 samples, just as different from each other as any of these other samples, except they were replicate times and mixtures. This was a well-mixed thing here. And so the yeast didn't have much time to work for between 4 and 5, although we got diluted from about 4.8 gallons to 4.81 gallons, not significantly diluted between number 4 here and number 5 with the yeast. And then water is simply a different sample. So there is a logic and a stepwise progress of change that should go from higher to lower and then a little lower. So that's kind of odd. Maybe the bubbling of the yeast in this sample tended to throw some evaporation out and make it a little more concentrated. If my precision was good enough, this might be significantly increased. But these are replicates, so the fact that they're all this different, to me, would indicate that the bubbles of the carbon dioxide coming out from the yeast acting on this might be making my precision worse. Anyway, there's our labels, and the real thing I wanted to show you was if you change numbers to text, you can turn a graph from an XY line graph, an XY plot, into a series plot where these are always going to be equally spaced, and no matter what the numbers are, they're not going to move around because they're no longer considered numbers, they're considered placeholders or whatever, and they come equally spaced as integers in a series of things that are different than each other, from each other, and not related by their x values in any mathematical way. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you.